bio. And there we are, we're recording, okay. So, Thomas Legendre's most recent novel, Keeping Time, was published by Acre Books, University of Cincinnati Press. That's the University of Cincinnati Press has Acre Books, which I'm really happy about because I got to work with Nicola in Cincinnati Press as a very young grad student. In March, Keeping Time was published. His previous work includes The Burning, a novel, Half-Life, a play produced by NBA, and the National Theatre of Scotland, and Dream Repair, a radio drama aired by BBC Radio 4. He is an assistant professor of English in the University of Nottingham. Thomas, take it away. Everyone else, if you wouldn't mind being muted, muting yourself while Thomas is reading, that would be greatly appreciated.
Well, thanks very much, Alan, and thank you, Kristi, and for inviting me. And Alan mentioned earlier the trailer, which I'm very glad to hear that you're going to run after I read, because if you were to run that first, anything I say or do would be a tremendous disappointment in contrast. And I have to give a lot of credit to Nicola Mason, my editor at Acre, along with a couple of people I know who helped to do that. And I've been delighted with that from the outset. And I've been throwing that at anyone who is willing to look and listen. So, okay, I'm going to read something from this novel, Keeping Time. And I've chosen something that I hope would make sense and that would read well aloud and has minimal, in fact, the way I'm tweaking it a bit, no dialogue. There are a few things that you need to know if you haven't looked at the novel already. This novel, Keeping Time, takes place in Scotland, and the chapters alternate between two narrators, Aaron, who was an archaeologist, and Violet, who is a classical musician or pianist. And they live in Edinburgh. And what I'm about to read is one of Aaron's sections. Now, Aaron is American. He's from North Carolina originally, and he's been living in Scotland for about 20 years. He works for an archaeological contract firm owned and run by someone named Graham. That's why you're going to hear the name Graham. And he's been sent out to a place on the west coast of Scotland called Kilmartin Glen to examine a panel of rock carvings, Neolithic rock carvings, that has just been discovered near the site of his first excavation, which he did when he was first starting out as an archaeologist about 18 years ago. So he has some personal history in this place, and this, you will sense, begins to emerge a little bit because this passage involves his arrival, his return to this place. A few more bits of info that you'll need is that he and his wife Violet have two children. Their names are Tessa and Jamie. Things are not going well with Violet. In fact, he's thinking of moving out and taking a room not too far away, rented by someone named Natalie Sharples, and you'll hear that name as well. A few other things, you'll hear the name of a town, Loch Gilphead. That's the nearest town to this site, this archaeological site. A reference to someone named Fergus, who is guilty of some archaeologically questionable behavior in the past, and Aaron resents him very much for it. And you'll get a reference to an unspecified and unnamed she at one point. That's deliberate, so I hope you're not too confused. Okay, enough of that. So this is the beginning of a chapter with Aaron. And I'm gonna tweak a little bit here because there's some dialogue, and so I'll give it as kind of indirect dialogue in order for it to make the most sense. My parents expected me to go to Chapel Hill. They expected me to become enlightened at a convenient distance. They expected me to take wing, not suddenly, but in stages, like my two older brothers, returning home on a regular basis with altered clothes and hairstyles to signify my independence as I tried to argue them out of their political delusions. Instead, we had transatlantic conversations about the finer points of radiocarbon dating and bone collagen analysis. I described the geological cycle with its continuous transformations of igneous and sedimentary and metamorphic rock. And I broke the news that, like me, Scotland is alien to the rest of Britain. A piece of shrapnel lodged in the northwestern corner of Europe's skull, fortunately without impairing upper brain function. London is fine, thanks. My parents asked me, of course, where this piece of shrapnel came from. From a pair of continents colliding in the Iapetus Ocean, just south of the equator, about 500 million years ago, I told them, buckling and crumbling and folding together to force new segments above water for the first time. At one end of the wreck, England emerges. At the other, Scotland is born. Now, without getting too political, doesn't that make sense? This impact gives Scotland the West Highland and Grampian Mountains, and after another 100 million years of volcanic activity, a position at the hub of the supercontinent known as Pangaea. Contrary to popular belief, Pangaea isn't some tectonic Garden of Eden, but a fairly recent condition where the billiard balls happen to collide in the middle of the table. And here's Scotland at the very heart of it all, with mountains indistinguishable from the Scandinavians to the north and the Appalachians to the south. But then a plate boundary becomes active and rips it all apart, creating the Atlantic Ocean in the process. The larger mass moves off to become the Americas, while the smaller portion drifts northward and, after an outbreak of volcanoes on its western isles, is reshaped by glaciers, gouging out glens and corries and granite ranges and bare crags like the ones I could see from my office. My office came in later versions of the story, of course, but in retrospect, I couldn't distinguish exactly when it appeared any more than I could remember when gas became petrol, when pants turned into trousers, or when I started eating takeaway instead of takeout. I had retained a few hard nubs of vocabulary: parking lot, sidewalk, and the long vowels of tomato and vase. But after 2 decades of erosion, my voice sounded foreign everywhere I went. I belonged to neither country, and I belonged to both. A few days after my conversation with Graham, I drove toward peaks that had more in common with the Blue Ridges than with anything in England. The ocean that divided me from my homeland also plunged its arthritic fingers deep into Scotland's windward flanks, forcing the roads into twists and coils like varicose veins that made my drive a 3-hour journey instead of a straight shot from one coast to the other. In early morning darkness, I took the motorway across the central belt to Glasgow, following the unseen imprint of the Antonine Wall, then headed north before turning west, and then south, and then west, and then north again, following the lobes of coastline farther and farther out. The world took shape with balding hills and bare-knuckled pastures and empty croftlands, tufts of dark forest, the glades breathing out mist. By the time I reached Loch Fyne, the sun had risen high enough to put everything in a cold sweat. There was an enameled shine to the grasses and ferns at the roadside. The fields churned to a muddy gleam. I took my bearings from the loch beside me, running with the others in parallel slashes that held either fresh or salt water depending on how severely the glaciers had carved them out. Over the hills, only 10 kilometers away, Loch Awe had released several hundred Niagaras as it melted, digging out a gorge that slowly silted up and became a flat-bottomed valley and estuary, the tides washing in and out with changing sea levels to erode the steep bluffs into terraces. This was the anatomy of Kilmartin Glen, or the bones of it. Like most of Britain, it had been deforested by the time the Romans invaded. At Loch Gilput, I wheeled through a couple of mini roundabouts and passed through the low frontages of stone. A few shops had been replaced by others, like spark plugs in their sockets. The board for the inn had been repainted, but not the one for the pub. I caught sight of my favorite sandwich vendor, still serving his daily bread, and the outdoor supplier where I had bought extra waterproofs 18 years earlier, now flanked by Chinese and Indian takeaways. Since when? How long had I been away? At least one season of change. The world was opening up. Low tide had exposed kelp.
Excuse me? Can I please go to the bathroom?
Bye-bye.
All right, bye. I'll be right back, though.
Low tide had exposed kelp at the Esplanade. I eased down the window for the harsh bride scent. The humped landforms in the distance gave that sense of things too near and too far, too light and too dark all at once. I was here again. There was something strange in my heart. Another roundabout took me out of town along a level stretch, fringed with bracken and scrub and mixed woodlands, and despite the sunlight, a sense of colors draining from everything everywhere. It held the dirty wash of foliage I had come to expect, the tea and tobacco stains, the tarnished brasses and russets. Tessa and Jamie had never been to North Carolina during the autumn peak. They hadn't seen the fierce, hot flush, the colors all touched with fire. I imagined the three of us driving along the Blue Ridge Parkway and stopping to play in fallen leaves together, pretending it didn't matter that Violet wasn't there.
Sorry, what page?
With the feeling. It dropped like a rock into a well, listening for the splash or the thunk. I lowered the window fully.
I think they should.
Last Friday, I had phoned Mrs. Natalie Sharples to tell her I was leaving town unexpectedly, a half-truth that allowed me to put off the decision. A decision whose consequences couldn't be reversed. Even if I moved out for only a month or two and then returned with my marriage renewed, Tessa and Jamie would feel the gap. It would linger in their emotional registers. If Daddy went away in the past, he might go away again in the future. I didn't want him to feel that. But as I followed a broad passage through the hills, I couldn't think of another way to provoke Violet into recognizing her behavior. How much of it involved me? How much came simply from her? I had tried talking. I had tried silence. Now I needed to do something more drastic. But how would it feel living apart, living alone? I steeled myself to that possibility as I passed slopes that had been clear-cut, or harvested, as the phrase went, to leave a vast exposure of stumps and ragged aftergrowth, a timberline of sitkas packed together in the distance, their branches knitted tight. The hills parted beyond the next bend. The land opened up and spread out flat. The entrance to Kilmartin Glen. A petrol station gleamed just a bit farther along, the site where Fergus had unearthed a prehistoric stone and deliberately fed it into his crusher before anyone could notice. This, according to a reliable eyewitness. Report him? Aye, go ahead. The deed was done, the evidence gone, her word against his. Good luck, lassie. His true grievance had been not against me, but the world I represented, everything that stood in his way. At least, that's what she had told me afterwards. I felt a tick upward in my blood pressure. I eased it down. And as the crag of Dunad came into view, I swung into a track marked for the Invier, bed and breakfast, my reflex intact. Despite my fervor for the new rock carvings, I stopped here, as always, to pay my respects. I'm going to stop there because I think it's been about 10 minutes. And someone else might have to go to the bathroom.
Oh, very good. Are you unmuted?
Yeah, sorry about that. As we warned you, you know, it's usually very inane trolling so far, so how blessed we are, I suppose, in that way.
Well,
and thank you so much.
I'm used to being ignored, so I mean that's just I'm touched that someone considers me worth heckling in that way. So that's great. Yeah.
And both of them were inquiries, which is so fascinating. Can I go to the bathroom, and what page?
Yeah,
I mean,
I think
trolling, if nothing else.
I wonder, should I have said no when he said, "Can I go to the bathroom?"
I love that he was like, "I'll be right back," and then stayed. We removed.
I missed the trick there. I should have said no. You can't.
Yeah. So, Alan, did you want to? I don't know.
I want to read.
It's awkward. I don't want to introduce myself, even though I am the co-host.
I'm about to introduce you. So, Kristi Carter is the author of Aria Viscera from April Gloaming, Red and Vast from Dancing Girl Press, Daughter Shaman Sings Blood Anthem from Porkbelly Press, and Cosmovore from Aqueduct. Her poems have appeared in several publications, including So to Speak, Poem Memoir Story, CALYX, Hawaii Review, and Nimrod. Her work examines the intersection of gender and intergenerational trauma in 20th century poetics. Currently, she is editing, along with James L. Brunton, a collection for students consisting of scholarly and creative work on trans studies, trans-asterisk studies, and experiences. She holds a PhD from the University of Nebraska Lincoln and an MFA from Oklahoma State University. Kristi Carter, please take it away.
You know, hey, thanks, Alan, that guy who lives with me and is my partner in life as well as in this series. And I just want to thank all of you for coming and weathering the always exciting excitement that we have here. I might read a little less than 10 minutes so that we have time to talk to one another, ask each other about the bathroom, and so to speak. But I do want to say that I am from North Carolina, so hearing in Thomas's story, it's wonderful what a small world it is in these different ways. So this is the book, and yours might not come with a reading list sticking out of it. That's okay. It's normal. I love that I saw Thomas got a copy of it today, and I don't think anyone from my press is here right now, but it's pretty exciting. It's been one of those books that's come out during the lockdown, so this is an exciting opportunity for me since everything is so surreal in terms of trying to celebrate the way the world is right now. So I'm going to start with a poem called The Dedication, and this poem is partly inspired by some really terrible workshops that I was in while I was in grad school, where certain gendered ideas about how mother and daughter should relate influenced my work on this book, which is about me and my mom. And so I just want to say, beloved listeners, this is not directed at you, but it may sound that way at first. So, the dedication. I spoke. I want to dedicate this to my mother. They were silent in the face of what sounded like blessing. I took out my large intestine to show them the old matters percolating in me. They were silent, mistaking my body for a curse, my witch for witchcraft. I sang, "She who bestowed me a spine of iron and a mouthful of salt, forget me, the ticket to your oblivion. How my small form opened a gate that my brothers could not. I was the mirror, bronze wrought, holding her face and foretelling its map of scars." So for the next poem, I think that I'll read. This one kind of delves into music, which I do go on and on. I mean, I guess it's my book, so I can do what I want, but it's a longer book for a poetry book, and it has more themes, I guess you could say. But this one, called Oratorio with Curse, and oratorio, I know we all know this as opera fans, but just, sit with me for a second. It's something a character does when it's emphasized, kind of like a soliloquy, that their specific sung speech is going to advance how we understand what's happening in the opera. I mean, I guess that sounds like most operatic songs, but instead of being repeated, it's a special event. So, Oratorio with Curse. The opera of our empire does not rise on smoke. Its notes were drawn on air, not with coal. I have kept you all this time next to my vitals, as it is written, as it has been retold. So when the shrill marcato of the lonely aria shivers in the marrow of the bones that bend to square your face, I remember the verse you sang since the beginning. Be fist and shield, deflect the world. You are coveted like gold, but not rare. Iron child, one day kill me. Okay. So I had the very special pleasure of being, Nicola, I love your comment. Hello, Nicola's mother. I had the really exciting event of having one of our readers review my book. And that came out earlier this week, which was nice. And in the review, you know, it's so wonderful when you get to see people thinking about your work outside of yourself, because you kind of have to get over your own preconceptions, or maybe you should. But Hannah Vanderhart, who's here, chose to review, in her review rather, she talked about this poem Unsown, which I don't think I read before out loud, and now I'm going to, because I'm inspired by her very insightful mind. So this poem is called Unsown. When they ask her, does she want children, they mean to ask her, does she want to die? Does she want to watch whatever body she hated swell and bloat and be reupholstered in the mother years, where a bite of food might have to count for hours as her teats leak microscopic pearls all the way home? The piglets root around in her soft flesh, which, when she looks down, seems to belong to some other fallow lifetime some centuries ago. Okay. I think that I will read just one more in the interest of chatting afterward. And this is a poem called Of the Daughter Who Spoke. And I was lucky enough to have filmmaker Simon Ray, who also lives in Edinburgh, as crazy as that might be. Some years ago, he and I collaborated through Magma Poetry, and they paired filmmakers with poets whose poems they accepted, and they accepted this one. So if you go to my press's Instagram, they have been promoting his film, and it sounds, you know, sonorous and beautiful because it's read by a nice Scottish man. So that's something we can all look forward to if we go over there to April Gloaming. So this will be the last one, and then we'll talk. Of the Daughter Who Spoke. And I'd like to add, this is the second to last poem in the book, so you'll just have to buy the book if you want to know how it ends. You will kiss me at the head of the stairs. There, I am disappearing into the flat history where the world wants to imprison me. You will touch my hair and witness the oil of your living fingers leave silver streaks across the soil-colored remainder. I remain her, the one who reminded men that women aren't born mothers, that children aren't born adored. Keep some shard of me, please, among your other footnotes and desiccated ferns. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Silent clap.
Yeah, so we have some time for questions for either people. As I said, I'm going to go ahead and post the trailer for Keeping Time, and I just posted that over in the chat.
Post
oh, wait,
to
I didn't.
Everyone, yeah.
Sorry, one second.
But while Alan is doing that,
go.
we just want to thank you again for coming to these. And this is such a great turnout, especially we like to do these in the evening, US Central Time usually. But this lunchtime reading is, you know, a nice way to mix it up. And we all need some mixing it up with everything going on in the world right now. Alan has posted the trailer for Thomas's book. So please, when you get a moment, go check that out. And now what we usually do is turn it over to some time for questions or comments. So now that everyone's gone to the bathroom and they know what page we're on, should be fine if anyone wants to just jump in and say what they want to. And thank you again.
I believe you can unmute yourselves.
You might, yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes, Nicola.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Kristi and Alan for being open to hosting. I know we have at least one more Acre writer coming up. So just being open to hosting Acre's wonderful writers on your series. I really appreciate that. And I know Thomas does as well.
We have two, actually, Acre
Yeah?
Press authors coming up. So we're really excited about that.
Elizabeth Lindsay Rogers is next week, right, with Sheila McMullen. And then Gary, whose last name I'm blanking on, unfortunately, but
Steve DeJarnett? Maybe, okay, I'll work it out later.
no, it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, any other questions? Yeah, we're really happy to have Acre Press. Like I said, I kind of cut my teeth in doing journals at University of Cincinnati, at Cincinnati
Review, yeah, you were a great volunteer, thank you.
Thank you. Thomas, as someone who's written, I'm going to ask you a question. As someone who's written some fiction involving time travel myself, it's always a challenge to me to figure out how to keep it from being like feeling really genre, and yours definitely escapes that. It feels very, very purposeful, very smart prose. What are some ways you seek, or what are some kind of maybe hurdles that you overcome, or something that that appears to you that maybe you don't have that problem, but appears to you maybe that you work to overcome?
Well, I think for the issue of time travel, for me, one of my big guilty pleasures was always time travel stuff. And I watched a bunch of really, and I still do watch sometimes, really terrible films, cheesy films and so on. So I always thought it was so cool. At the same time, I get really irritated with the way it's usually handled, because it's usually time and space travel without them acknowledging what's going on. Like it's also teleportation somehow. They'll go to a different place on the planet or something. Anyway, I could go on about that for another hour and bore everyone silly. But I think for me, the thing that I dealt with in this novel was seeing how it would serve to complicate and mesh the characters in their situation more fully. And so that it was, rather than being a kind of hurdle, I saw it as a resource, as a way of putting into, making more explicit that feeling I think we all get of looking at our younger selves and feeling that there's a kind of non-identity that goes on. It's an uncanny thing where you recognize your younger self as yourself, but you feel very different from that person at the same time. And there can be a very conflicted relationship there, or a sense of identity that arises from it. And that to me was part of what was going on in this novel, was the relationship between these two characters and how their younger and older selves would come into play more explicitly. And that seemed to be a lot of fun, although it became very complicated fun. And I did make very detailed. I had calendars set out, I had dates, I had events fixed out, because all of this, it had to cohere, along with landscape issues having to do with almanac figures and all kinds of things. All that had to be kind of almost invisible underneath to make it work, so that it seemed to work very naturally in the story, even when the characters weren't aware of what those correspondences were. I needed to be aware of that in writing it. And so, and that seemed to me a resource, a way of making things very interesting rather than a block.
Very good. Thank you.
How did you go about choosing the location of Kilmartin? Were there sort of other contenders there? Or was it always that place which grabbed you for this particular story?
That's a good question, Sam. Thank you. I originally discovered Kilmartin through the play Half-Life that I did years ago through NBA and National Theatre of Scotland. That introduced me to the area. I knew at that point, didn't know it existed, knew nothing about it, didn't know anything about archaeology. I didn't know what the Neolithic was, completely ridiculous. And I became involved in that project, and it was a big rush. It was very frenetic. It was very fraught. It was very strange. And I kind of washed out of that feeling like I had just scratched the surface. So then I needed to reapproach it. One of the things that I found why it was Kilmartin rather than moving on to somewhere else is I found the place itself, I think I hope in the passage I just read, gives you a sense of the landscape itself I found inherently interesting, but yet also subtle. It's not a spectacular place. It has a really high concentration of archaeological sites, prehistoric sites, within a small radius. However, it's quite easy to go through that area without really recognizing it at all. It's not a Stonehenge. It's not like the stones of Callanish. It's not like Orkney with the stones of Stennis or the Ring of Brodgar. It's not with these spectacular places, but it's just absolutely packed full of interest. And the landscape itself, I found was very interesting. It was part of why I was interested, why I think that landscape became archaeologically important. And so that to me was part of the interest in it, is that it was something that it felt to me quite undiscovered and unexplored from my personal perspective. I know an archaeologist, especially in Britain, would say you're nuts to say that, but from I think from most perspectives, it's not a well-known place, and it should be much better known, because I think it's really a fascinating place. So that was the territory for me, and I couldn't resist working on it.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for one more, right? What do you think of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
One more burning question from the audience.
Or lukewarm. Any type question will be accepted. Well,
I feel like I should mention there's a wonderful interview, if I do say so, because I interviewed Thomas, that's on Acre Books' blog. We call it The Lounge. So if you're interested in learning a bit more about the writing of the book and Thomas himself, you can check that out on our blog, which is at acre-books.com. And then it's The Lounge is our blog.
I think I found it there, Nicola. Okay.
We stretched it out. I think there are maybe 4 or 5 questions. Thomas has just some fascinating answers to my very.
I had to return the serve, as it were. Nicola asked some good questions, so it forced me to. It's like playing tennis. You have to dive across the court to get that ball, and sometimes you end up looking good, even though you don't deserve to, because the questions were very good ones.
That's great.
Can I squeeze in one really quick question for Kristi?
Yes, please. Sure.
Hearing poems aloud without seeing them, it's always quite intriguing to imagine what it looks like on the page and the kind of line lengths and so on. And I just wonder whether the poems you've read, do they tend to have quite short lines or long lines or mixture?
Oh, I do use a mixture. Thanks for that wonderful question. So here's the last one, just to get a sense of how it looks. And it's kind of clipped, I suppose you could say, Sam, and then, pours out, so to speak. But one of my other ones, let me find it. The lines are longer. And I mean, there's a cliche, I guess, about poets when they're young, which maybe I can claim to still be such a person, but that you're writing your entire life. And so I was writing this for many years, this book, and you can see some different like experiments with form that I've tried over time. There's one poem even that the lines are so long and breathless that I don't think I can read it out loud. I mean, maybe one day if I have like 3 coffees and I don't know, wear a cape, I could do that. But I love that question. Thank you so much, Sam. There's a mixture is the short answer. All right. Well, Alan, you're typing something there. And we just want to remind folks, our next reading is also Thursday, if I'm correct. Yes. And we will be promoting that. Alan is a very Facebook heavy promoter, and then I am more active on the Twitterverse, so to speak. So I'm going to put my Twitter and my Insta in the chat. And if anyone wants to come follow me at either of those, now I know who you are. And I know you don't need to go to the bathroom, right? So we can follow one another. And I just want to thank you again so much, everyone, for coming. This has been such a great reading, and we're really excited to have this series. So yeah, is there anything else you want to say or remind folks of, Hun, before we end it?
Well, I also have an Instagram I just posted. That's probably the best way to connect with me. If you're not really into politics, I post a lot of, I'm a very liberal person. I post a lot of political content. And so if you're not into that, then I wouldn't connect with my Facebook.
But just ignore those and connect for the readings is what he really means to say. That's what I mean.
And yeah, so I've got my Instagram there. I got my Twitter there. Please come to future readings as you can. They're always a real blast. And this reading, figured out that I can not allow participants to unmute themselves. So hopefully there'll be even less trolling moving forward. So thanks everyone so much for coming. It's been a wonderful reading. Have a great day. And yeah, thank you. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Kristi. See you soon, hopefully.
And see you soon.
Thank you again.
Thank you for coming. Much appreciated.
Bye.
Bye.
I'll leave first.
Great.
Just in case he wants to. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
You can go to the bathroom now.
I love that. Yeah.